Hi, thanks for watching. My name is Andy. Today, this video will discuss how to diagnose and replace a failed water filter housing. The water filter housing is what your water filter actually screws into on the refrigerator side in the back right. The tools you'll need for this job are a 1/4-inch nut driver, a crescent wrench, normal pair of pliers, and a rag to soak up any water that might result from taking the water line off. Let's get to work. Now that you're behind your refrigerator, make sure that the refrigerator is unplugged and that the water has been turned off. First thing we'll do is remove this metal plate, which is covering the water lines exiting the filter housing. Using your 1/4-inch nut driver, remove these 2 bolts. You'll see some gray fill putty, which is to prevent air from creeping into the refrigerator section. Grab that and remove it. Now what we'll do is disconnect these 2 lines down at the bottom. Let me show you how it's done. Here we are behind the refrigerator. These are the 2 lines that we mentioned in the step above where we removed that plate. They come straight down the back of the refrigerator. One is the water coming into the refrigerator. You probably have a tube like this hooked straight to the wall. That rubber line is then connected to this hard plastic line. We'll remove this in the upcoming step. One of the lines leads behind this plate, which we'll remove. This goes to your water valve. So I want you guys to understand, water comes into the house through this one, goes up through the filter housing, the water gets filtered, and then returns to the water valve through this other line. Let's take a look at how it works. You'll have 5 screws, 2 here, 1 in the center, and 2 on the far right. Remove all of these. Once all 5 screws are removed, being careful, this is sharp, grab in the center and lift straight up. There's 3 tabs that have to clear the inner cabinet of the refrigerator down here. Once the panel's been removed, you can more clearly see that this line hooks up with a nut on top of that water valve. We'll remove this to get that line off. You'll need a crescent wrench. Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So it goes counterclockwise to loosen it. Really, it shouldn't take a whole lot. They shouldn't be overly tight. You can do the rest of it with your hand. Be prepared, there may be just a little bit of water that comes out. Set a towel down here or under here so you can catch that. And you may also have to wiggle the line as you're pulling up. Once these are disconnected, we're going to disconnect our rubber line from our hard plastic line. You'll notice there's a brass piece followed by a pretty shallow nut here and then a larger nut here. These have to twist independently. So with your pliers, grab onto the smaller one. Then with your crescent wrench, grab onto the larger one. Holding the pliers steady, twist the crescent wrench this way. Now that our lines are free, from the inside of the refrigerator section, we can pull these through the hole in the back of the fridge. Now that your water lines are removed, we'll come back to the refrigerator section where our filter is. We're going to remove our filter by turning it to the left.
and it drops straight down. Set that aside. Next, there's a cover on top of your water filter housing. This one you'll grab firmly, pull straight back towards you. Some will have clips in the back. You'll lift straight up and then out. Now we can see our filter housing. There are 2 1/4-inch nuts, one in the top right and one in the top left. Go ahead and remove both of these. Once they're loose, you'll notice that this will tip down, but there's 2 claws in the bottom that you have to lift up on. Now that it's detached, pull straight through. I wanted to show you an up close of how these water filter housings work. You've got one line coming in from the wall that goes into the housing. Once the filter is screwed in, this little black valve is actually depressed by a ramp. This ramp right here, or right here, actually depresses this black valve. And if that's the case, if that gets depressed, water can then flow through to the other tube. Water comes in, black valve's depressed, water goes out, after it's filtered, of course. So there it is. Most of the problems that you'll see with these water filter housings is that black valve is not getting depressed enough. And I mean just a fraction of an inch will do it. And frustratingly, typically the aftermarket filters, this is a MWF, but the aftermarket filters will actually cause damage to the housing. And I don't know whether it's a patent issue that the aftermarket can't use that same proprietary ramp, whatever it is, the aftermarket does damage to this black piece right here, and therefore the filter housing has to get replaced. To reinstall your new filter housing, take the ends of the lines, both of them. We're going to stick those through the hole in the back right. Feed them all the way through. Those claws will go facing downward. And insert those into the holes. There's 2 square holes underneath. And that should line up your 1/4-inch bolt holes for the top. Go ahead and get each of these started. Once those are tightened up, go ahead and reinstall the filter. And reinstall the cover on top of the filter.
All right, for reassembly, it really only goes one way. You'll have one end that has male threads. This hooks up to the water line. Go ahead and thread that on. Get it as tight as you can with your fingers. Then take your pliers, grip the smaller nut, take your crescent wrench, Hey guys, listen, don't go crazy. Don't just torque on this thing. Give it about a quarter to a half turn. That's all you need. The other end of this line hooks to the valve at your wall. Go ahead and hook this up appropriately as well. This leaves us the other end, which is that brass nut. I want you guys to notice this piece here, it's flared. The nut, the top of that, whenever we screw this down, is applying pressure on this collar. This is why we don't over tighten these things. What people will do is they'll crank and crank and crank on these things, thinking it's not tight enough. They crack the collar, and now you've got a water leak. And you've also just destroyed your water filter housing. So please listen to me. Don't crank down too hard on these. To reinstall, push the water line in first, making sure that it's seated evenly all around. Let that nut drop down, making sure it's not cross-threaded. Just hand tighten that. As tight as you can get it with your hands is fine. Once you've gotten that as tight as you can, take your crescent wrench, give it a quarter turn. Once all that's done, we're going to turn on our water, make sure that there's no water leaks. So a good practice is once the water is on, have a helper fill a couple glasses of water while you're checking for leaks. You know, run your fingers along it, should be dry, should be bone dry, not even a drip. So dry it off with a towel, run your finger along it, look for drips. If you do have a slow drip, just snug it up with your wrench. Doesn't have to be a lot. You want it just tight enough where you're not going to damage it. Once you're satisfied that there's no leaks, we're going to reinstall the lower panel. Again, remember you've got the tabs that have to go on the inside of the cabinet housing. Line up the bolt holes. And reinstall those with your 1/4 inch nut driver. Now that we've gotten our lines hooked back up, we'll need to replace the insulation putty, making sure no air gaps can get into the refrigerator section. And replace our metal plate. You may have to push down the lines just a little bit on the front, and that's fine. Using your 1/4 inch nut driver, go ahead and snug those bolts up. Done. Here's the most common mistake that will cause water leaks for this particular job. Here's what happens. People go to reinstall this part. This is the water line coming from the filter housing. Notice this little collar onto this threaded part, your water valve. It's that collar that seals the water up along the top of that threaded portion. What'll happen is people crank down on this nut, that keep cranking, and it cracks this collar. And now that's a spot where water is going to leak out. So here's how it's done. Seat that down into the threaded portion. You can see it's fully inserted. Making sure this is not cross-threaded. Just get this hand tight. Don't go gorilla crazy on it. Just get it hand tight as you can get it. Then give it a quarter turn. Now it shouldn't need a whole lot more. Once you turn water back on, it'll be bone dry. You'll have dried it off. Run your finger along it. Make sure there's no water leaks, not even a drip. If you do have a drip, tighten it again, just that much. Don't go crazy with it. You know, tighten it just that much again. Check for leaks again. If you get another drip, tighten it that much more again. That's the trick. So many people mess that up. Another thing that I see people doing, which is just, you know, no use in doing this, is they put this that thread sealant, that white thread sealant for plumbing. They'll put it around this. Well, there's no sense in it because this is, you know, I just showed you basically it's watertight because of that collar. So thread sealant should do absolutely nothing for you except for mask an issue that you might have with this collar. So yeah, don't do that. Do it like I just showed you. It's the right way. And here's the second most common failure point for leaks with this job. This is again the water line leading from the filter housing. This is that rubber tube that goes directly to your wall. I want you to notice inside this rubber piece you have that black gasket. That is the sealing surface on the end of this threaded portion. So it works a little bit differently than the one I just showed you. The last one goes in, you have the collar that nut presses down on. Well, this one actually seals around the outside of this metal portion via that black gasket. So what'll happen is people get this threaded on there, they take their pliers and just go crazy with this one. Well, it ends up either just distorting that black gasket or cracks it, and then there's no way it's going to seal up at that point. So be careful with this one as well. It has a little more tolerance than that collar does, but just get it snug enough, plus a little bit more, to make sure that it seals up well. Well, there it is, guys. That's how you replace a water filter housing on a side-by-side GE refrigerator. Once you've turned your water back on and checked for leaks, you can then plug in your refrigerator, roll everything back in place, and enjoy yourself a nice cold glass of water. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have not already done so, please be sure to subscribe and give a thumbs up. Helps a lot.